socialist leadership is essentially staging a coup, and the founder of the conservative Vox Party was just shot in the face. It's one of those things that just needs a spark, and there's something, an explosion.
Yeah, and these are these are those kinds of things that they're just interesting to me because when you're living in a country where where there's a lot of control mechanisms that are strongly in place, governmental and otherwise, and then you have upheaval where people start thinking about their security, where their food comes from, where their water comes from, where they want to live, what kind of community they want to be in. It starts to, places like Ecuador get very interesting. So it'll just be interesting to see how that plays out.
It's becoming more and more brazen, like where there's just groups of 20 dudes are just walking into a Target and grabbing whatever they want and, knocking stuff over and walking out with it.
We're always kind of up against this like fear-mongering phenomenon where, the unknown is always a little scary, I think, for everybody. And so when you have an unknown variable like a foreign country and you're just getting news, about it, you tend to have, your perspective on it is going to be colored by the news, which is colored by a lot of fear. Like if I saw this video from the States about Ecuador, I'd be like, holy crap, this looks crazy. This country looks nuts. I'm not going there.
Right.
But there's like a huge drug epidemic in some major cities.
Oh yeah.
Fentanyl and other things like that.
Huge.
And I saw Vancouver, Canada, which is, where my wife was born and raised. Dude, there's like whole streets of like homeless people, like literally frozen, and there's syringes all over the place, and it's like really bad. That's Canada. Like Canada never used to be like that.
They do exist here. I wouldn't call it prejudice. I wouldn't call it racist. I wouldn't call it even all that dishonest. Like there's some amount of dishonesty to it, but it's more so just that prices aren't always set. There's more flexibility here in everything, including prices. And so, you go into a normal store. By the way, these are the most delicious mangoes you've ever tasted.
Yeah,
and the box is this big.
Oh, it's massive.
Like for 20, so good.
Yeah. I mean, 72 mangoes for 27. It came out at like 30 cents a mango or whatever. And they're big and they're good. They're the best, really. But then, I'm waiting there, I'm looking at the mangoes, and then some, campesino guy comes in, right? And she knew him clearly because he buys there every week, and it was my first time there. And he asked, how much for the box of mangoes? So I'm, waiting there.
You're keeping an eye,
And she's like, 25. 25, yeah. She tells him 25, quietly. I turn around, hey, what about me, man? It's like, I'm showing up. I'm like, I start giving him.
Hello and welcome back to the Ecuador Insider Podcast. Jesse, Carl, Brandon, thanks for tuning in, guys. Right now, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell as well. Really, we would appreciate the like, and also topics, comments, things you would like us to chat about, topics you'd like us to cover. Please put that in the comments as well. Let us know how we're doing. Any advice, any questions, please put them in the comments. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the rental market. I guess here in Vilcabamba and surrounding area, we'll cover Loja as well, perhaps touch briefly on some other parts of the country, and also answer some of your questions from YouTube. So you guys have done a great job giving us questions on YouTube. Sometimes we get to those comments on YouTube, not always. We're going to do our best to get through some of those questions here live today on the pod. So thanks for tuning in. Before we go into that, massive protest going on in Spain right now. I hadn't even heard about this. What do you know?
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, dude. Yeah. Cut. Yeah. No, I don't know. I don't know how to talk about it intelligently.
Yeah.
Other than, it's.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I asked the question is just interesting because, Ecuador kind of plays this. Contradictory is not the right word. It's sort of contrarian. Ecuador kind of plays this contrarian role in the world where what I've noticed over the last 10 years is that when things are going really well in the economy globally and there are not unusual or scary geopolitical events, there's less interest in places like Ecuador. And then when you see either economic turmoil or sort of authoritarian issues, or you see geopolitical stuff going on, there's an uptick in interest in places like Ecuador. So it's just been interesting for me to track that as we go through these super turbulent times where, we've got, what's the quote, war, rumors of war, and something else.
That's
The
the
Bible, yeah, the biblical quote.
There'll be wars and rumors of wars, yeah.
Yeah, so we're kind of, in that time potentially, and it's just interesting to sort of track that. I know France has had large-scale demonstrations. You were telling us a little bit about Spain as well.
So this is I saw videos of the nationalist protests, but it's the socialist leadership is essentially staging a coup, and the founder of the conservative Vox Party was just shot in the face.
Really?
Yeah. It's wild. Like, it's wild. Their nationalists are in Barcelona marching against the socialist coup. Like, it's crazy. It's wild. Like tens of thousands. Like, I don't know if we can cut footage in to show, but there's like thousands and thousands of people. It's pretty wild looking. It looks like they're on the verge of something. Like, it's almost like this is one of those things that just needs a spark. And there's something, an explosion.
Yeah, and these are these are those kinds of things that they're just interesting to me because when you're living in a country where where there's a lot of control mechanisms that are strongly in place, governmental and otherwise, and then you have upheaval where people start thinking about their security, where their food comes from, where their water comes from, where they want to live, what kind of community they want to be in. It starts to, places like Ecuador get very interesting. So it'll just be interesting to see how that plays out.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
And then in addition to that, like what's going on in Panama. So we just had a friend of the channel visit Vilcabamba for the first time. He's lived in Panama for I don't know how many years. But Joe's down here now, looking to move from Panama. He still has a place in the States, but he's been living in Panama. He's been living in South America for a long time. And he was explaining to me what's going on in Panama, and it's wild. Like the Pan-American Highway, he said it's just constantly full of protesters now. Like, again, thousands and thousands of people. And the national news was there was some, I don't remember the guy's name. Actually, I don't even know if he might have been an American guy. Correct us in the comments, guys. I don't recall, but he literally went to the front of the protest. They were protesting climate change, I think, too, at this time, which is wild. They had the whole highway blocked, and he went and he shot 2 climate change activists, killed them.
Oh wow!
In cold, like on video.
What?
Like it's live, yeah.
So, the lady that came down with him, she was mentioning that the protests were about some mining companies.
Mining companies, yeah.
They were coming in and they would like kind of ruin some watershed as well.
Yep.
They basically
environmentalists.
Yeah, environmentalist stuff.
Yep.
But it was pretty bad, and like most of people in Panama are against it.
Right.
It's not like just like a fringe minority.
No. That like I looked after I talked with him. I looked online and I saw, because I didn't want to see the video of the heinous crime, but I wanted to see like what did it look like if there was videos. It was wild. There were cars just lined up for as far as you can see across the road, and there was just people.
Wow.
Just, it's so. But this is a guy that's choosing to come here, right? He's escaping Panama in a sense now. Sure. Like he just doesn't want to deal with that anymore.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because we have, I don't know. It's just, you see all these different things across Europe, across the United States. You see the stuff in France. You see stuff, that's happening across the US. I've got friends that still live in cities, and it's like daily that they're sending me a video of, Memphis, more stores are getting looted, and it seems like it's becoming more and more brazen, like where there's just groups of 20 dudes are just walking into a Target and grabbing whatever they want and, knocking stuff over and walking out with it,
I saw this video last night, and I was actually thinking about it in the context of our podcast in Ecuador. Sort of, we're always kind of up against this like fear-mongering phenomenon where, you know, the unknown is always a little scary, I think, for everybody. And so when you have an unknown variable like a foreign country and you're just getting news, you know, about it, you tend to have, you know, your perspective on it is going to be colored by the news, which is colored by a lot of fear. And, you know, they're sort of showing the stuff that's scariest, right? So I'm watching this little video of a guy who goes into a convenience store and is just robbing it, you know, in front of everybody. And they're trying to get him to stop. And sort of the clerk is saying to, maybe it was the owner or the manager, you know, there's nothing you can do. There's nothing you can do. Just let him do his thing. There's nothing you can do. And the guy's in there, you know, like it looked like a homeless guy. He's in there with a shopping cart, kind of talking to himself in a strange way. And filling up the shopping cart with whatever, making a huge mess, knocking things over, you know, it's very calmly in a sort of organized fashion going about robbing this store, because there's nothing that, you know, there's nothing they can do, at least in this state where they were at. And the manager or the owner ends up, one of the guys kind of gets up in his face and is sort of questioning whether he actually has a gun or not. And one of the guys, I think, you know, either the owner or the manager, ends up beating him pretty bad with like what looked like a bamboo pole or something, but a big, you know, huge stick, like an 8-foot long, you know, thick piece of wood, and beats the crap out of this guy. Anyways, I'm watching this video and I'm thinking about this in the context of kind of this phenomenon that we experience here of this sort of fear-mongering sort of echo chamber. And I was thinking, like, if I saw this video from the States about Ecuador, I'd be like, holy crap.
Right,
you know, this looks crazy. This country looks nuts. I'm not going there.
Right.
But this was, I don't even know what city it was in the U.S. This was in the U.S. And, you know, stuff goes on in the U.S. obviously all the time. But I don't know, for some reason, when you're from there, it doesn't scare you in the same way. You're just like, it's a phenomenon you know about. It's a problem you know about. It's familiar to you. Mm-hmm. So it's nothing really.
Yeah, it's like normalized for you. Right. I mean, I've talked a little bit about that where I grew up in Chicago, just outside of Chicago. You know, there was gangs and on the corners of the streets, and there's, you know, prostitutes a couple blocks away on the road, and, you know, drug dealers, and, you know, you had drug dogs running through your schools and lockdowns and kids hiding guns under vending machines. And so it's normalized while you're there. And
yeah, interesting. Yeah, I was watching a video too, which I hadn't really researched that before, but there's like a huge like drug epidemic in some major cities.
Oh yeah,
fentanyl and other things like that.
Huge,
like
right now.
And I saw Vancouver, Canada, which is, you know, where my wife was born and raised. Dude, there's like whole streets of like homeless people, like literally like, you know, frozen, and there's syringes all over the place, and it's like really bad. And that's Canada. Like Canada never used to be like that. Yeah. And you wouldn't see any such thing, not even remotely like that in Ecuador, right?
Right.
There's a little bit of alcoholism, you know, like I said, there's 2, 3, 4 town drunks.
Right.
But you don't see like, you know, junkies and stuff like that anywhere, even in big cities.
Right. I mean, you're seeing the fentanyl epidemic. That's an epidemic, man. That's running through cities. Like you're seeing, you can go on Twitter or on YouTube or TikTok, and there's probably 1,000 videos you can find of a waitress at Denny's, or you know, or you know, the Waffle House, like falling asleep. They're videoing in their seats. Customers are videoing the waitress literally knock out while on their feet taking their order, just all dosed out in fentanyl. Man, it's sad.
Wow,
sad.
Yeah, and I guess if we are obviously we're in a time of turbulence. Now you could argue we're always in a time of turbulence, but I would say now certainly we are, whether you think we are in other times as well or not. But we are certainly in a time of upheaval, a time of turbulence. Even some of the weather events you see around the world of, you know, rivers disappearing and floods and fires. And I mean, even when we were having those fires here, there were so many of them. And I've been here for 10 years. I've never seen anything like that. So many of them, even I'm starting to think like, man, what's going on? Is this like a signal from God? Is this, is this the fire?
And then you're seeing other fire. Like, look at all the volcanoes erupting right now.
Yeah.
Like, it's a grand solar minimum. So I think at least the people that understand that cycle believe that that's what triggers volcanic activity. I don't pretend to understand whether that's true or not, but we are in a grand solar minimum, I think, or we're approaching. And you've got volcanoes in Iceland, Japan, Mexico, all erupting. Like the Mexican volcano erupted yesterday, I think, or this morning. And then
Wow.
I'm seeing videos of Iceland of this volcano, and you're literally, it's wild to see the ground move like it's a freaking a Hollywood movie, but it's really just, it's real life happening right now. So all that's happening right
Yeah,
now.
and it's like, you know, some of those kinds of things, right? Whether it's economic turmoil, whether it's war, whether it's earth changes, whether it's other geopolitical events, food, you know, all these kinds of things. These are, you know, these factored in for me, you know, 11, 12 years ago when I was planning a move into my move. And then over the last 10 years, every time there's stuff going on, it just makes me feel very good about my decision to have left the States and moved to Ecuador, moved to this part of Ecuador and living here. And kind of one of the things that gives me some comfort, that's sort of, you know, there's a lot of things that create a different playing field between here and back home in the context of the stuff we're talking about now. But one of those things that gives me great comfort is it's like, of all of the, of all the problems that you have back home, you know, societal problems, you know, social problems, economic problems, etc., the attitude back home in general tends to be one of sort of not my problem, right? If it doesn't directly affect me, if it's not me or my family, there's authorities that are in charge of that stuff. There's a way to handle it. It's kind of, you know, it's not my business. It's got nothing to do with me, is kind of the attitude back home. And it's like when we see events happening here, you know, that are negative, whether it's a home, you know, a break-in or a water shortage or a fire, or, you know, somebody that just needs medical assistance or needs some kind of help, you know, a house that's damaged, whatever, you know, you see this community reaction. You see this sort of social reaction where the attitude in this society, in this culture, isn't one of, it's their problem, it's someone else's problem, right? Here, the sort of mentality is, if someone has a problem, then the community kind of, you know, steps up to the plate and handles it. There isn't an expectation of, oh, there's a government organization that will fix this, or we'll just call this number and it'll get sorted out in one way or the other, or not my problem, I'm busy, I got to wake up for work tomorrow, right? There's much more of an attitude of, we're all in this together and we need to look out for one another. So, you know, if we're in a time of breakdown across the world, you know, I'd rather be in a culture where people look out for one another,
Right.
you know, than in a culture where it's sort of like every man for himself kind of mentality.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, an anecdote. There was an attempted break-in, I think, a few days ago, and I'm on the security WhatsApp group, and the whole community came together once again. Messages were sent, "Hey, get over here. Let's block this street. Let's," you know, there were guys with motorcycles, and I don't know all of the details, but they were attempted to catch the you know, the robbers who attempted a robbery, which was unsuccessful. They weren't able to break in, but you know, that did happen. So, you know, it's really good to see, like, the community. Like, the more these things happen, the more the Ecuadorian people are like, say, eventually they'll catch people, right? You know, that definitely deters. That definitely can deter some of the people that are wanting to, you know, steal a few.
Right. That's where capital lessons are learned, right?
Right.
Capital punishment.
Did we talk about this in previous episode, where in up north in close to Quito, in Ambato, I believe,
Yeah.
there were some guys that were caught and they, like, basically made torched them. You know,
Right. Yeah, it's wild.
poured gasoline on them.
Yeah, it's in general, it's kind of refreshing to have, again, those kind of things. It sucks that they happen, right?
Of course.
But to live in a community where people come together like that, where it's generally a trusting community, it's refreshing. It's, you know, it's all these things, you know, we just talked about with, you know, political divide and the climate issues and all the other, you know, the global wars and civil wars and politics and all that stuff. And, you know, we didn't even talk about, like, the financial side, the financial system. Like, I saw the U.S. government released their treasury report for October. Dude, guess what the annual interest on debt is, and it's growing. Guess what the annual interest is right now? Just the interest alone.
The number.
The number. $1 trillion and growing. Like the month of October, I think the interest on debt alone was 40% of all the income tax revenue. Just the interest.
Yeah.
Dude, and it's growing like it, and it's way worse than that. If you look at the details of the report, they have so many unfunded liabilities and the way they report things, it's worse than even peers. And it's already like, holy crap, that can't be real. $1 trillion in interest annually. I mean, it's, I don't know if people can comprehend that, right? We talked about this. What was the difference? I'm gonna have to Google it because I don't remember it. I don't remember the anecdote. But this is something good to explain the difference between million, billion, trillion in seconds. Yeah, so just to explain the magnitude, right? To kind of grasp the magnitude of $1 trillion in interest on the debt that you have, the magnitude of difference between a billion and million can be illustrated with this example of the time scale. 1,000,000 seconds is 12 days. 1 billion seconds is 31 years. 1 trillion seconds, 31,688 years. What? Like that's the magnitude between, it's just $1 trillion. It's $1 trillion in debt annually just on the interest. Dude, like,
and people wonder why their spending power is going down and they have to work harder and all these kinds of things. So, for people who are watching this channel, who are thinking about, potentially a foreign country, potentially Ecuador, potentially perhaps this area of Ecuador, there's a lot of tips and advice out there, right? There's a lot of do's and don'ts, tips and advice. Some I think is good, some I think is totally crazy, but but you got to do your research and make your own decisions. And, I think that Ecuador and places like Ecuador are absolutely not for everybody. And I think, you should make those decisions with some caution and with some, some good thought that goes into it. But if you are looking at a place like Ecuador, you may be interested in coming here for a while to rent, to check it out, to see what it's like living here. So people I'm sure are interested in the rental market in general. So let's kind of cover that a little bit in terms of overall Ecuador, and then obviously more specifically this region. So, Ecuador in general, in terms of the rental market, again, I think is not that far out of line in terms of ratio of what people make and what it costs to rent here. Like, I think that ratio is fairly similar. So we're talking just about much lower numbers than what we're used to back home, right? So I don't know what your median salary is in the US these days. Maybe it's 50 grand, 70 grand, something like that. What's your median salary in Ecuador? It's probably, somewhere in the ballpark of like 6 to 10 grand a year or something like that. That may even be a little high. It may be more like 6 or 7 or, something like that. But so it's a very different ratio. And then if you're talking about, what rents cost, I think there's also similarities to back home in the sense that, if you're in the middle of nowhere, Ohio, or the middle of nowhere, Mississippi or something, you're going to pay a lot less than you're going to pay in San Francisco or New York or some of those markets. Same thing here, right? If you're in Guayaquil or Quito, you're going to spend more than if you're in some of the more lesser known cities or more rural areas. And then of course within that, the markets have their gyrations or their specifics or their parameters based on local market dynamics. So for example, Vilcabamba is sought after by Lojanos for second homes. Same with Malacatos. It's a place that people come to vacation, people come for holidays. So it has a little bit different market than 20 minutes away in a different town where people aren't coming for sort of tourist reasons. They're just living there, right? So with all of that said, there's a really wide range, right? Like in Quito or Guayaquil, $1,000 a month, $2,000 a month is just normal. You might get an apartment, like maybe not even an amazing apartment. I mean, nice apartments I know in Guayaquil and Quito are expensive. Not in New York expensive. You know, you're not spending 5-10 grand a month for something that's really nice, but you could spend 2 or 3, is my understanding, pretty easily in those markets. There's no such thing in this region as a $2,000 to $3,000 rent, you know, of any kind. It doesn't, like, literally does not exist. So there's different markets. So in our market, you know, Loja region, really we'd have to talk about the city, and then we'd have to talk about sort of Malacatos, Vilcabamba, and then maybe some ancillary or some other areas in the region. So in the city itself, you know, you can still find stuff as cheap as like $150 a month. Now that's, you know, that's like a room. You know, you get like a nice room or a little tiny studio, like tiny studio. You know, it's almost like
sometimes not nice.
Not super nice, right?
Yeah.
You're talking almost like student housing at that price, right? You're talking about like kids that come in from the province to go to college.
Right.
They can get a room for even $100. 150 would be like a nicer room. So that's kind of like your lowest end. For an apartment that you'd consider livable, that you're not sharing anything, your minimum is going to be more like $250 at the lowest end.
Yeah, probably like $350, right? In that range, right?
Well,
there's a variety of things.
$350 gets nice, and so that's kind of the point I want to make for people.
Sure,
like, so you can come here and live in what would be considered here normal, and what would be considered at home low end.
That's a great distinction.
Yeah.
Right? Make that scene, because normal here, you know, for people that have not been here, when you say this is like a normal apartment, that's going to be below what most people perceive as normal from the West. Like, they're going to be like, I don't know. I'm not comfortable here. Like, so.
Yeah, that's like Latin American
Right.
low end, not poverty low end,
Right.
Not even close to that.
Right.
But right, it's different.
Yeah.
So some examples of those differences, right? You might not have hot water in the sinks.
Right.
You might, even the shower is almost always going to be hot water now, but it could be the instant hot water that heats up right at the head of the shower. That,
AKA a suicide
what
shower.
they call suicide showers.
Electrical.
Which are not dangerous at all, but that's what they call them. But
and some of the finishes, even like inside the room, like you may not have trim. Like you might have a gap between the flooring and the wall, and you see cracks in the wall, and you might have crack. Like, that's kind of normal. It's not dirt floor, tin roof.
No.
But it's your people that are expecting, you know, if you say normal apartment in the States and you say normal apartment here, it's not going to be quite what you would think.
Yeah. So let's use that as our next level of metric, right?
Yeah.
So for what we would call, you know, like a standard, let's use that word, what we would call like a standard apartment back home. Yeah, now you're up in that sort of 250 to like 550 type range in Loja. That's just like a standard normal apartment. Then once you get over that, once you get over like 500-600, you know, now you're into real luxury. Like, now you're into like an apartment in Loja that's more than $600. I mean, it's beautiful. It's probably furnished, it's high-end everything, it's 2-3 bedrooms, 2-3-4 bathrooms, comfortable, probably has a balcony, probably has a little outdoor space or common space, or, you know, a roof deck or something like that. And at that point you're in, I don't think there's any modern conveniences the apartment wouldn't have. You know, once you're up into that luxurious 600 and above type, I'm talking about in Loja. Now for houses in the city, you're spending a little more. So you spend a little more in general on a house. So you might spend for like that same equivalent house, sort of a standard house back home, your probably minimum is going to be closer to 500, 400 to 600, something like that as a minimum, and then go all the way up. You could spend $1,000, $1,200 if you're talking about a luxurious, you know, nice house in the city. Now those don't get rented out very often because there isn't, you know, people live in those. Those are not generally speaking available. They do come available. But yeah, so basically in Loja, I think, you know, to live reasonably as far as rent, yeah, it's somewhere, you know, if you budget in $350 up to about $600, $700, $800, you know, you're squarely in that very comfortable range. You'll have tons of options, tons of apartments you can look at. And that's kind of where you're going to be at in the city.
Yeah. I don't have much experience shopping for rentals in the city. So.
Yeah, and there's different neighborhoods in Loja that are, you know, considered nicer or not as nice. But yeah, even, I mean, you could get a beautiful apartment in what I consider the nicest neighborhood in Loja, Rodriguez Wit. You know, four to $700, $400 to $800. You're in luxurious.
That's
very
where Pablo's
nice. Like,
office is?
yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a nice place.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
apartment equivalent to that one that his office is in.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'd be like $400 to $600.
Oh, no
something
kidding.
like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's, right, so that's actually interesting because that's not quite the same here in Vilcabamba and Malacatos. It's much different.
Yeah, it is very different. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's touch on these markets. So Vilcabamba, Malacatos are markets that the rent is held higher because they're places that less people live and more people want to vacation in. And so whatever rentals are available are in demand. So specifically Malacatos, Vilcabamba, a lot of the rental market is for nights, is for weekends, is for, it's on Airbnb, it's on booking.com, and Lojanos and people from other parts of Ecuador flood into these areas for holidays. And holidays in Ecuador are a very common occurrence.
Very frequent, yes.
And basically, we have a holiday a month, like a holiday a weekend a month.
Feels like that, yeah.
And so because of that Airbnb, I think it's largely because of that Airbnb market or just the demand in general. Rents here are higher. So you're going to spend, there aren't as many apartments, number one. So there's less of an apartment market, especially in Malacatos. Vilcabamba, in the last 5 years, you've had a bunch of apartments being built.
Yeah, and there's some more being built right now.
There's a bunch more being built now.
Yep.
So it's actually easier to get an apartment these days in Vilcabamba. But Malacatos, there's not many apartments.
Right.
For some, for a nice apartment at this point in Vilca, I mean, your range is not that different. You're probably between about $250 up to what, 400, something like that. For
maybe 5.
Maybe
more.
5.
Yeah, because I mean,
For an apartment,
just that one we looked at by the office, that was $350.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know.
That was a 2-bedroom.
Yeah, it was too bad. It wasn't. I mean,
But that's
furnished.
kind of like for Vilcabamba, that's kind of high end. Like that's
yeah,
like a nice, pretty new.
yeah, I would say nice-ish.
middle.
For here though, I'm saying like for
Yeah.
Vilcabamba, it's not like
Yeah.
they're building luxurious buildings.
Well, they are doing some of that a little bit
Yeah,
now.
there's some nicer
Yeah.
apartments for sure. No, you can pay up to like 500 for a nice apartment.
Yeah.
Or like a newer built. And there's a distinction between furnished and unfurnished.
Yep.
That can be significant.
Oh yeah.
Like for 200, usually it's not going to be furnished. Almost in every case, there's not going to be a lot of furniture included. You're going up to $350 when you have a fridge and some beds and couches and stuff like that.
And then there's a difference also with what's included. If a lot of places, you might get internet and electricity and water included. Some of them don't do that. Some I've seen a lot more rentals recently now where utilities aren't included. That's separate, or it's this level and then anything over. So that's kind of changing a little bit.
Yeah, with the apartments, I think in most cases they are included. Yeah,
oh, it's
but
just in
houses,
the houses
typically
it's
is
different.
not.
Yeah.
I think, in general, because you have to install your own internet. It's not like you're sharing with the rest of the building.
And the devil is in those details, right? Because you could be renting. Let's jump into houses for a second, which is a different market, higher, more expensive. But you could be in a house that you're spending $500 a month, which is great, and you could have a beautiful house for $500 a month. But if you're paying for the maintenance, for all the landscaping, and you're paying for all the utilities, and you're paying for everything, that's very different than $500 a month, all of that included.
Right.
So you could be spending $800 or even $1,000 a month, all of that included. Could be as good or a better deal.
Right.
Especially if you're talking about grounds that need to be maintained.
Yep.
If you're not, that's really the big expense because you could, if you've got a full-time guy here, you're spending $450, $500 a month, on that
maintenance.
labor, right? So if that's included, that's huge.
Yeah.
And if it's not, then that's almost your rent doubling basically.
Yeah.
If you need that much maintenance, like if it's a decent sized property.
Right.
But yeah, let's talk about the housing market. So the rental market for houses.
Can we just tune back just real quick? Because I think let's talk a little bit about like the housing rental market, because we've seen some more apartments going up, but just from a supply and demand and just like a financial model perspective, like because the rents, I don't really know how to describe it, but it doesn't seem like there's lots of new rental houses being built and run as rentals. Like in the States, you see that it's common. In Canada, people have rental properties as investments. And they do here to some extent, but it's not nearly the same level of people doing that because the model,
ratio.
the ratio doesn't work, right? There's not enough spread. You don't make, the payback on building something new is much longer here based on the cost of living
The
because of the
rental income.
rent income. So there's not as many people that are saying, hey, this is a nice business opportunity from a rental perspective. So you don't see them building rental homes purposely, right? Sometimes you'll see, hey, I'm building a weekend home. I'm coming here. I'm going to spend a couple months here. I'm going to come from Loja on the weekends. And then they say eventually, like, okay, maybe I'll turn it into a rental. But you don't see a lot of homes that are purposely built for rentals because of that dynamic, I think.
I was just gonna jump on that. There is a sweet spot, I believe, where the cost of building the unit is, you keep it low enough where you can charge as much in rental. There's like a sweet spot, and I think it's like for cabins.
Sure,
way.
that makes sense.
agree,
Yeah,
It's for like maybe a 1 or 2 bedroom smaller
more like
unit.
a rustic
Yeah,
kind
like
of
simply built,
eco,
but nice.
eco
You know,
cabin.
because there's a demand for those. There are
Sure.
a lot of retirees here that are maybe single,
Sure.
or like a single person, or maybe a couple that just looking for a small place that, and the thing that I think we do need to address a little bit, I think the rental market here is influenced more by expats than other places, because there's a lot of expats that come here. Maybe they're potentially going to buy something down the line, but they're looking for a rental for maybe 3 to 6 months to a year before they can find their dream property. So like, I've rented for 12 years. I've been here, we're all renting. So
Yeah.
a lot of people I know are renting as well.
Now that's an interesting distinction because the twofold, right? The purchasing, the home and apartment buying market seems much less dependent on expats and more influence on Lojanos.
Right, exactly.
And then the rental market, it's kind of twofold. Like the weekend, the Airbnb rental side of things, that's predominantly Ecuadorians.
Yes.
Very few. There's some expats, but I would say there's more predominantly Ecuadorians. But then like the long-term rentals, you're right. That's probably more.
Well,
expats.
it's also like within a pretty narrow band. It's like the expats affect the rental market in Vilcabamba for sure. Within like U.S. standard homes.
Right, exactly.
So it's actually a tiny part of the rental market.
That's a great point.
But it's the only one that matters to us, maybe, like to our viewers on this show and things like that. But yeah, 100%. They're just, Ecuadorians have a different concept of housing in general, but also especially of la casa del campo, like the country house, right? They're not, that's a place to go and enjoy time with the family. It's not a place to go show off your really nice house. So it's like Ecuadorians don't care the way we do about all those little details that go into the build, that if we're going to live there, we want, right? We care about where all the outlets are, and we care that there's hot water in all the sinks, and we care that maybe, whatever all those things are. Maybe you want a fan that, what do they call them, that sucks the bad smells out of the kitchen, or exhaust fan, whatever. Right? We think we have those ideas, and it's not that those things don't exist here. They absolutely do, and a lot of Ecuadorians with money build that way, especially for their primary residence. But for the country house, they tend to be simpler. They tend to be, so a lot of the country houses, as foreigners, we look at and we're like, I'm not living in that. And so that part of the market is totally unaffected by foreign interest, which is most of the market. But then for people who either came here as foreigners and built, and therefore did it most likely to the style that people would want coming from overseas, or locals who just built really nice houses, yes, foreigners certainly affect that rental market, no question.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I've lived here 12 years. I've learned to accept the way that the rentals are gonna be here, and I think a lot of other expats are the same. Like I go to people's houses all the time that live in, sometimes somewhat rustic rentals as well, and those are rented by expats in most cases. I would even say that expats tend to prefer sometimes a rustic house by a river or nature. There's a market, like in that sense, the expats affect that market, because a Lojano wouldn't rent some cabin Charlie's Cabañas or something like that up in Yamburara, and these kinds of like more remote properties that are surrounded by nature, that are quite rustic actually, and quite not up to Western standards in most cases. I mean, even the house where we live currently, it's a 3-bedroom house. It is rustic to some capacity. It's comfortable. It's not uncomfortable, but we don't have hot water in all the sinks, and there's a few things like our ceiling is like playboard or whatever they call it, like
Playboy. What's that? Yeah, I forget what that is in English.
particle board or whatever,
Yeah.
or it's just a look, but it looks rustic. It's a brick house. I mean, and it's it's nice enough for us. We did some renovations and improved it. But yeah, I think because the rental market is scarce, whatever comes available, somebody will rent it out. Like an expat will rent it out in most cases for long-term rentals.
Yeah, the rental market in general is fast moving. Like, so it's like the opposite of the the real estate market cycles are a little slower. The rental market seems like that cycles pretty quickly. Like they come on the market, snapped up, and like if you're interested in something and you see it, if you don't act like immediately, it's gone.
Yeah, and it's been that way since COVID started. So
Really?
yeah, like going back to as much experience as I have here, going back to July of 2013. So when I got here, it was the end of a boom cycle. So when I got here, for a decent house, like a nice house, coming from the States, like fresh off the boat,
Off the boat.
looking for a nice house, you were really kind of like 8 to 1200 at that time. It was expensive. Yeah, it was really expensive, and there was just nothing available. Like, I mean, it took me months when I first got here to find even a decent rental, which wasn't that decent at all, that I was spending, I think like $800 on. For like anything deep really that I liked that I saw was like 1200, things like that.
Wow.
Then
in
Vilcabamba, then
like in the gated communities or
no, just nice, nice stuff though. I'm talking about like like a Stephanie level house, or that's higher maybe than some that I'm talking about, but a nice house. Then when everybody left, right? So 14, 15, 16, there's like nobody here. The market in every way is dead. There's just no one coming. People are leaving, both Ecuadorians and foreigners. At that time, everything was available to rent. Like there was a few years there, several years, where all of a sudden that stuff that was 8 to 1200 is now like 4 to 800.
Oh wow!
and you can rent anything you want. You get beautiful stuff at 4, 5, 600. You're getting like pool and grounds and multiple bedrooms and maybe a steam room. And you're very, very comfortable. Then when COVID hit, also no one was building for a few years because the market was so depressed. So there was no new construction taking place for 14, 15, 16, or at least 14 and 15. And then, as things kind of stabilized after that, but then when COVID hit in 2020, you had this sort of big influx of interest into the valley. And within probably 6 months, all of a sudden the rental market was super tight again. Prices started going back up. I don't know if they ever got back to that like 2010, 11, 12 high, but they've gotten close to it. Yeah. Where now you're kind of back in that 8 to 12 range for like a really nice, something that's really nice. You can still find nice stuff, 454 to like 8, some in that range. You can still find definitely nice houses for sure. But yeah, you're not getting that like incredible deal anymore,
right?
On that, the pool and the house and the guest house, and you're not getting that for under 1,000 anymore.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to jump in a little bit and just talk some tips about rentals, because like I said, I think we've lived here at least in 10 different rentals, if not more. Like we've moved around. We lived in Masanamaca, we lived in Yamburara, down in Cucanama, San Joaquin, down in town. We used to rent a place in town, actually an apartment. It was $150 a month. It was not furnished or anything. We had our own furniture. It was like one large room with a kitchen and a bathroom. We could, there was a rooftop. We could dry our clothes on the roof. There was a laundry machine. It was very simple, basic. But anyhow, I think right now, because I'm seeing some of the rentals, I see the ads on Facebook or whatever. I see some of the rentals that Pedro or some people at our office are promoting. And sometimes I think the prices are high for what you get, comparatively. And yeah, of course, the market has changed. But I just wanted to jump in on a few tips. What I would do if I found a place that I liked, but I thought the price was a little too high for my comfort, I would try to talk the owner into accepting like multiple months rent in advance. or like agreeing to a longer term stay based on a price reduction of some kind. That's actually what we did where we live now. The rent is $350 a month. It doesn't include water, electricity, or internet, so we pay that separately. And we do need to pay a gardener to cut the grass, maybe once every couple of weeks in the rainy season.
So all in,
So
you're
it adds
probably
up.
like 450, 500,
Yeah,
something like that.
Yeah, with the internet, it's like $35, I think, is our thing. We use a little more electricity than average, maybe $50 a month, because we have 2 fridges, a large
You're
chest
mining
freezer.
that Bitcoin, aren't you?
We're mining Bitcoin under the bed. And actually, no, we're not. Don't come to my house. I'll deal with you.
He'll get right on that security group app. And...
I'll have a hole in the garden ready for. No, I'm just kidding. So, so no, we're not mining Bitcoin, but we are drying bananas and mangoes in our dehydrator, which costs a little more electricity and stuff like that. Yeah, so an extra $80 there, and then water is like $5 a month, and a gardener is maybe 20 to $40 a month on top. So yeah, 450, 500 a month, everything. But we didn't like the state of the house. There was some parts that weren't tiled. There was some doors that were missing. So we actually had a deal with the owner where we gave him 9 months rent in advance based on him using those funds to do the renovations we asked for. So it's a little more hands-on, it's a little more complicated, but now we have a house that we really like. It's super comfortable. It looks nice. It looks almost brand new because of all the things that we did. The rent is very reasonable for what we get at this point. It's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house, 7-minute drive from Vilcabamba. We got half an acre of land. We can plant things if we want and stuff. Space for the dogs.
Yeah.
Got a wall all around it and stuff.
Yeah, it's a nice community back there.
Yeah, very safe. We got good neighbors and stuff. So, anyways, those would be some of the tips I would recommend. Because I do think some people, that's what I was going to say. I do think some of the Ecuadorians, they know that expats will sometimes just pay whatever they're asked, and they'll sometimes ask for a little more. Even they know that they'd be willing to accept less, but they know that someone might be willing to pay $500 for a cabin or something like that. Like you see some of those sometimes.
No, and there are, like, maybe we should touch on that for a minute, because again, this kind of bleeds into the category of fear-mongering echo chamber again, but I think it's good to address it in a real way. So the idea of like gringo prices, the idea of basically getting ripped off as a foreigner in Ecuador, and I've talked about this 100 times over the last 10 years, but for anyone that hasn't heard my spiel, I think it's good to understand that from a broad and also neutral context, right? Where people, again, we've been here a really long time. We went through the whole learning curve, right? Of like showing up green off the boat and taking all our lumps and making all the mistakes and learning the language and learning the culture and living our lives here over 10 years for me, more for Carl. And so we understand, those things here from a pretty deep perspective, launched businesses, etc. So, and I just want to kind of give people some context. So I personally would frame this in 2 ways. One, is the Latin American culture more likely to try to get a little bit more out of a transaction than we're used to from back home? Yes. So like that exists. So that's one piece of context. Then the other piece of context I would put into it is I don't think it's, that caveat aside, I don't think it's that different than if you show up from Mississippi in New York City.
Right.
And you're trying to figure stuff out, you're probably going to get ripped off a time or two before you realize kind of the culture and the way things work and how people go about their business and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's true probably in many places in the world. Now, again, with the caveat that there's probably more of that here than back home. So with that framing in mind, let's give some color. So I think that it's relatively normal here if you're selling a product or a good or service to someone that you think may be willing to pay more or just not know the price. It's not uncommon here to just say a number that's a little bit higher than what you would charge if you're thinking the person knows the price and is not, is gonna, you can't fool them on that. That does go on here, right? So, the way that I'll give an example, right? I was told this on the pod last week, but there was no flights to get back from Quito. We have to take the sleeper bus. We get to the bus station in Quito to take the sleeper bus. We go to get dinner to bring on the on the bus, and it's it's one of those sort of standard hole in the wall places that serves almuerzos and meriendas and empanadas and stuff like that, right? So your merienda, your dinner is going to be like $2, $2.50, $3. That's what it's going to cost at a place like that. I go to pay. I ordered 2 dinners plus a humita, and I said cuánto le debo, like how much do I owe you? And she goes 6, 8, right? And she just kind of says 8. It was probably $6.50, $6, $6.50. The dinners were probably 2 to 3. So even if you say 3 and that's 6, and then the humita was probably 50 cents. So it's probably
7.
$6.50,
Unless
7.
the humitas were $1 each, and maybe it was 8.
Maybe. Well, no, I was only one humita.
Oh, okay.
So maybe it was 7, right? And she said 8, or maybe it was 6 and she said 8. And I've been here a long time. Most of the time in situations like that, I would actually say, no, hold on. Like, how much is the dinner? How much is the humita? And I would give her a little bit of a hard time in a nice way for trying to get a little more out of me. In this particular case, I just laughed because I thought it was funny the way her mind worked through it, where she got to the number and then just added $1 or $2 and said a different number. But
funny.
so I just laughed and paid the $8 and and got on the bus, because it's not a big deal. It truly isn't a big deal, right? But those things do happen. And I think that I think that those differences, in terms of if you're like a local person, or if you're a campesino, or if you just have a certain look to you here, yeah, no one's going to try to get a little extra money out of you because you're not going to give it, right? And they know that. Whereas if you come into the rural areas from the city as an Ecuadorian, right? If you're sort of a middle upper to upper class Ecuadorian, you're a professional basically, and you come into rural areas, that same thing is going to take place. I've seen it many, many times where, I have different people from different walks of life, different sort of levels of society, that I'll send in to negotiate prices based on who they're going to be negotiating with, because they'll get treated differently. So I might go to my middle upper to upper class friends to negotiate stuff for me that's their world, other professionals, other contacts in their world that I need help with. They're going to get the best price from an engineer, from a lawyer, from different, for friends, from their social networks. But if I'm talking about a merienda, right, a dinner, or I'm talking about going into a middle to lower middle class Ecuadorian and negotiating a price on land or on something else, I'm going to tap a more sort of working class friend, a person who comes from a different level of society, to go in and get that treatment they're going to get based on the fact that they have a commonality in their background, and they know where each other comes from, and they understand how that sort of interaction is going to go. So gringo prices, they do exist here. I wouldn't call it prejudice. I wouldn't call it racist. I wouldn't call it even all that dishonest. Like there's some amount of dishonesty to it, but it's more so just that prices aren't always set. There's more flexibility here in everything, including prices. And so, you go into a normal store, you can negotiate.
Right.
Like negotiating here is just part of life. And people do, you've described this before on the show, but people do think something called the Yapa, which is where, you're buying something from somebody and it's 10 for $1, and you give them $1 and they give you the 10, and then they give you 2 more for the Yapa.
Sure.
And that's sort of, that's sort of almost like it's almost an aspect of negotiation. Like you're not gonna ask for more unless you're Ryan, but you're not gonna ask for more, expect it. But it's almost part of the equation of like, oh, you came to me, you bought from me, I want you to come back to me. Here's a little extra. Now we have the relationship.
Right, exactly.
And that's true even, in like hardware stores. Like that could be true in places you wouldn't expect it. In many stores, prices aren't even on items. Like you have to ask, and then you can absolutely say, and y cuánto me lo dejo? Like, how much will you give it to me for? Like, what's your lowest price?
Right,
Like,
right.
you can have those conversations. And sometimes, especially in Vilcabamba, where there's money, they'll kind of look at you like, get the F out of here.
Right.
It's $12. Come on,
Right.
But many times that 12 turns into 11 or 10,
Mhm.
once you've gone through the negotiation, regardless of whether you're from here, whether you're not from here, or
Yep.
you're from one aspect of society here or another. So,
Yeah.
There's not in the States, right? You can go, you're apartment shopping or rental shopping. You're just going to websites and you're seeing, all right, this is the price. This is what I get. There's not really negotiation. It's like, this is the price right here. You're seeing stuff listed without prices and it's you're negotiating. Like the property I just looked at yesterday, you know, the owner says, how much do you want to pay?
Right.
You know, I'm like, well, it depends. Like so then I'm negotiating on length of stay. Well, what if I stay for a year? What if I stay for 2 years? What if I stay for longer? He's like, what if you stay for 10 years? I'm like, what's the price? But he's trying to get me to say a price, and so it's just different. Like it's if you're interested in a rental, you have to be open-minded to like, all right, it may be a negotiation, even if I don't want it. Maybe there's a way I can negotiate in, some of the utilities or, I don't know. It's just not like you go to a website, you see, all right, this is what's in my price range. I'm going to go set up, fill out an application and get an apartment. It's not like that here.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I think that's definitely a way to take advantage that they'll use sometimes.
Yeah.
It's like,
What do you
how
wanna
much
pay?
you give me?
Right.
Well, I want to sell this truck. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
how much? Well, how much you give me?
Right.
Like, come on, man,
Yeah.
give me a price. Like, we can negotiate. But yeah, it's very interesting. But it is true that as a foreigner in general, especially if you don't speak the language, much more likely that they'll try to just get a little more.
Sure.
Because at the end of the day, there are middlemen's when it comes to fruits and vegetables. And anything you buy, there's a middleman, right? So there's the price from the farm, and then there's a guy who transports it to the market, who sells it at that price, and then the market sells it to the restaurants, and then or the little tiendas, and so the price here was a certain price, and it went up a little bit. So somehow, we just went to this big fruit market in Loja, the big wholesale fruit market, and I had a couple of experiences like that there. I went to buy a box of mangoes, and I'm like, how much for the box of mangoes? That was 72 mangoes, and she said $27. I sent you a message.
Yeah.
Hey, you want to split a box of mangoes? $27, right? So I'm waiting there. I'm looking at them.
Just by the way, these are the most delicious mangoes you've ever tasted,
Yeah,
and the
amazing.
box is this big,
Oh, it's massive.
like for 20, so good.
Yeah. I mean, 72 mangoes for 27. It came out at like 30 cents a mango or whatever. And they're big and they're good. They're the best, really. But then, like, I'm waiting there, I'm looking at the mangoes, and then some, campesino guy comes in, right? And she knew him clearly because he buys there every week, and it was my first time there. And he asked, like, how much for the box of mangoes? So I'm like waiting there. And
You're
see what
keeping
he said.
an eye, yeah.
And she's like, 25. Yeah, she tells him 25, like, quietly. I turn around, hey, what about me, man? It's like, I'm showing up. I'm like, I start giving her a hard time, but in a funny way, right? Fernando was there. I hope he got it on video. It was really funny. I'm like, you see me with mi cara de gringo, y me quieres cobrar de más, I'm like, and I'm trying to make her laugh, and she's laughing. She's like, oh, yeah, okay. Yeah. And she let it go for 25, right? Which was the price, but she wanted to charge a few extra dollars. But that same box of mangoes in Vilcabamba would be 35, right, or something like
If
that.
you
right?
could, yeah.
Maybe.
If you
You
could get
can't
more,
even get it.
Right,
exactly.
you
So
can't.
27 was still a good deal, right? So it depends where you buy, all of those
Yeah,
things.
and volume matters,
Right,
and
of
how
course.
much you're buying, and
Yeah.
right. That's
And in
all.
those cases, when you buy in bulk, you could say like, "Y la Yapa," you just say, "Hey, will you give me a little extra?" And they'll be like, "Sure." And they'll drop you a couple potatoes and oranges or something. They'll give you a little bit extra. That's part of the culture here, right?
Yeah, and those margins are thin. Like you,
Yes,
you were
of
kind
course.
of getting at a minute ago. People are buying in bulk and then taking it around the country to sell it in different places. Here, most of that supply chain's local, but not all of it. A lot of the fruits come from the coast and even Peru and some other places. And yeah, I mean, they're making, maybe 10 cents an avocado or whatever,
Sure,
or they're making, whatever they're making, but it's not a lot. And those, it kind of brings up another interesting subject because, that scale here is so low. Like I remember when I first got here, and at that time, I think they're $1.25 now, but at that time in Loja, your standard taxi ride was $1, right? So you're getting in a taxi and you're driving 10, 15 minutes sometimes, and then you're handing the guy $1.
Right.
And you're thinking like, how does this guy make a living? Like, how does he support his family driving around all day making $1, $1? I mean, what is he getting at the end of the day? $60, like $80 maybe? And then how much of that is gas? 20 or 30? And so he's got, 40, $50 at the end of the day, and then he's did all the wear and tear on the car and the oil changes and the maintenance.
And the way they're financing the cars, like the tag on average, probably through all the discussions I've had, they're paying the car off in 4 years or so, but it's a $1,500 a month payment.
Well, they're paying it off at double-digit interest rates.
Right, right. But $1,500 a month is what, if they don't want to stretch it out past 3 or 4 years, that's a huge payment, man. For
so you
dollar fares.
So like, it's very easy when you come here when you're new. Giving a little extra almost feels right. You because people here really don't tip.
Right.
So I tip in certain circumstances still, but when I first got here, I'm tipping everybody because that's where I come from. You tip, and at first it seems, almost like the right thing to do or the nice thing to do to like, well, if something's 50 cents and I pay 60, it's helping them in some way. It's not hurting me. I don't care about the 10 cents. It almost feels good, right? But it's a very fine line. What I learned very quickly was that you really can't do that. You really screw up the market. Like, you screw up the market price of stuff for everybody. And you also kind of, for lack of a better word, you almost train people here locally to say, okay, well, when it's a foreigner, I can charge a little bit more. And then that causes problems. It causes problems for other foreigners. It also causes problems for other locals who get mad at the other locals for charging more than they should because they're screwing up other people's businesses and kind of screwing up the overall reputation and vibe of the culture and of the people here. But I have seen that. Like, I have seen, you really can't do that. Like, you really have to discover market price on stuff and pay market price. And then if you want to give people extra money because you have relationships with them and you know them and you understand you're solid enough with them that it's not going to screw things up in other ways for yourself or other people, sure, great. But but again, all of that stuff, it's adjusted to the cost of living. So if a guy, if a guy here is taking home $20 or $30, a day, based on his work, whatever that is, whether that's his net after everything is counted out for taxis or it's a labor job or whatever else, that's not very different than the guy making $20 an hour back home or whatever it is. In terms of their spending power, you're not giving that guy extra money back home. You're not, unless you just want to and you have it, but
Yeah, if you guys have made it this far in the episode, give us a like, subscribe to the channel if you're not. We'd really appreciate the support. Leave us some comments down below, guys, if you have questions about anything we've talked about. If you want to hear anything new that we haven't shared, drop some questions down below and we'll get those on a future pod. We're about wrapping up here, but one thing I did want to touch on, maybe we can touch this on this for next episode. I was just looking at some recent data on declining fertility rates in Latin America, and the most recent data, it's like more than half or about half of all of Latin America is now below replacement level in fertility rates. And Ecuador literally just dropped to just about replacement level, slightly below. So it's interesting, like we could talk about how that can relate to economy and things here and immigration, people coming from other countries that are at working age or younger that are contributing to society, how that impacts, declining fertility rates, at least in the future. This plays out, much later, but it's just interesting to see that half of Latin America, including Argentina, Mexico, El Salvador, Colombia, Brazil, Chile, Costa Rica, Uruguay, Peru is slightly above, but all of those countries are now below replacement level.
It's interesting, yeah. I mean, we know what happened recently that potentially could affect fertility rates with these procedures. I mean, it's a huge phenomenon in Canada as well. Like Canadians, like that's why there's so much immigration. I think the U.S. might be similar as well. Not enough. Are they countries that
Yeah.
But
I mean,
big
I
enough-
thought
these-
most of the world was still
So there's still a couple.
solidly in the plus, but that's Latin America is surprising because
Yeah.
they make babies here.
Right, right. So like right now, the biggest, according to this data, the highest above replacement level for fertility rate. Now these are rates. Now these aren't raw numbers. You know, it's rates. So Bolivia is up there, Paraguay, Guatemala, and Honduras.
Those are high still.
Those are the highest
Okay.
rates of above replacement level fertility.
A little replacement action.
Replacement.
So does that mean basically for a family that you need to have 2 children to be
Yeah,
replacement level?
it's like the average number of children a woman has during her lifetime. Like that's how they're framing fertility rate.
Mm.
Interesting. All right,
Yeah.
are we out of time?
We're out of
for-
time, fellas. We're out of time.
All right.
Well, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. We greatly appreciate it. We'll be back again next week. We have a number of expat life profiles, interviews coming out here over the next few weeks. We got Peter from Ishkailuma,
Mm-hmm.
which is exciting. We got sort of, you know, he's like the OG or one of them,
Yeah.
one of the first. I think he was saying in the interview that when he first got here, it was like 25 years ago, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think he was one of like 30 or 40 expats
Wow.
that lived here at the time.
Interesting.
So some interesting stuff from that. I know
Yeah.
you did a couple of interesting interviews
Yeah,
as well. That'll be coming out.
we got Wes and Felipe. They're a couple from the Netherlands. A young family down here. They'll be coming out soon. I got a young family.
A fellow hooper.
That is. He's a
If-
hooper.
If any of you guys are basketball players, we got excellent hoops down here, believe it or not, 2 days a week. We ball out, and certain somebody who I love is on vacation currently, and we haven't had a single argument on the basketball court in the last 2 months.
That's hilarious.
Argument-free hoops in Vilcabamba, Ecuador,
Oh,
at a
that is
pretty
funny.
high level. Come on down and play some ball with us.
Yeah.
We got the little kids little league started a couple weeks
Yeah, that's
ago. We're
pretty
screwing
cool.
around playing some baseball. My 4-year-old spent his time riding
cool.
his bike, but
Nice.
I enjoyed smashing home runs, so that was fun.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, there's some good vlogs coming up. We'll go to the wholesale market in Loja. We got the Day of the Dead. We got a vlog coming up with that as well. We have the Festival de las Artes Vivas. The
Arts festival.
Arts
Arts and
festival,
culture, whatever.
Arts and Culture Festival that starts on Friday. So we're gonna go out there. Fernando get some footage.
That's in
For sure.
Loja. And,
So
and-
once a year, yeah,
yeah,
it's, a
it's
big-
amazing. It's
amazing.
an amazing art festival that they put on in Loja every year. It takes the whole city. They decorate the whole city. There's performances going on constantly, like all day, every day for what, a week or something, or 2 weeks, or it's not
¿Cuánto
wow.
tiempo las Artes Vivas? 2 semanas?
2 semanas,
Couple
yeah,
of weeks,
2
yeah.
weeks.
25 countries are represented.
Wow.
It's pretty cool.
This
This is the 8th edition.
the eighth,
Wow.
eighth
Yeah.
annual.
Yeah, there's
annual
some
edition.
fiber festival going on in Vilcabamba. What's today? Tuesday?
Fiber,
Thursday?
did you say?
Like a fiber festival. It's like all these different
eat your fiber?
handcrafted fiber crafts and stuff. Bella's got some
This
stuff
is
she's
for-
making for it.
That's
Yeah. I don't-
fabric, you mean?
No, they said it's
This
called
is for,
fiber.
for gut health. you're
but it's
buying.
fabric. Yeah. Right,
Linseed?
Yes. Linseed oil.
Psyllium husk fiber?
Yeah, grapeseed extract oil.
Nice.
Yeah. All right, guys.
up.
We hope to see you down here one day.
So until then,
We'll see you next time.
Ciao, guys.
If you're interested in real estate properties, all of our property videos will now be uploaded on a different channel. Please click the link in the description down below.